Sign over the power of attorney, Mom. We'll take care of everything for you. I smiled and signed, but what I discovered in their safe 3 weeks later made them wish they'd never said those words. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that at 70 years old, I'd feel like a stranger in my own life. My name is Eleanor Hastings, and for the past 7 decades, I've prided myself on being independent, sharp-minded, and in control of my own destiny. I raised my son Garrett as a single mother after my husband Vincent died in a construction accident when Garrett was only 12. I worked 2 jobs, put myself through night school to get my real estate license, and built a comfortable life through decades of careful planning and hard work. But standing in my son's sleek penthouse apartment in downtown Millbrook that Tuesday afternoon, watching him and his girlfriend Cassandra rifle through my personal documents like auctioneers appraising estate sale items, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my son was a carefully constructed illusion. Mom, seriously, this insurance policy is from 1987, Garrett said, barely glancing up from the mountain of papers spread across his imported Italian marble dining table. His tone carried that particular blend of exasperation and condescension that adult children reserve for aging parents they've decided can no longer manage their own affairs. And these investment accounts? Half of these institutions don't even exist anymore. We need to consolidate everything into something modern, something we can actually monitor properly. Cassandra stood beside him like a perfectly styled shadow, her yoga-sculpted frame draped in expensive activewear that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She was 34 years old, nearly 18 years younger than my 52-year-old son, and she'd been living with Garrett for the past year and a half. Not as his wife, mind you, but as his partner, despite the small detail that she was technically still married to a venture capitalist named Preston who lived in Seattle. The divorce, she always assured everyone, was basically finalized and just waiting on some tedious paperwork, though that paperwork had been tedious for well over 14 months now. Her perfectly manicured coral nails tapped rhythmically against her phone screen as she photographed each of my documents, one after another, the camera shutter sound turned off but the flash still firing with each picture. Click. 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 Each snapshot felt like a small violation, a piece of my privacy being collected and catalogued for purposes I couldn't quite identify. I've managed my own finances for over 50 years, I said, trying to inject some firmness into my voice while keeping my tone respectful. After all, this was still my son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. I appreciate your concern, Garrett, but I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. I've been doing it successfully for longer than you've been alive. Mom, please. Garrett finally looked up from the papers, and what I saw in his eyes made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't the warm brown gaze of the child who used to climb into my lap when he had nightmares. It wasn't even the proud look of the young man who'd graduated summa cum laude from Whitmore Business School. What I saw was cold calculation mixed with barely concealed irritation, like I was an inconvenient obstacle standing between him and something he wanted very badly. We're not saying you're incapable. We're not attacking your competence or trying to insult you. We're simply saying that you shouldn't have to carry all this stress at your age. You've worked hard your whole life. You deserve to relax and enjoy your retirement. Let us handle the complicated financial stuff so you can focus on enjoying life. The word handle landed like a stone in my stomach. It was the same word people used when talking about problems that needed solving, messes that needed cleaning up, situations that required taking control. This nightmare had started innocently enough 3 months ago during one of our Sunday dinners. I'd been feeling overwhelmed with paperwork after my longtime accountant, Bernard Matheson, had finally retired at 78 and moved to Arizona to be near his daughter. Bernard had handled my taxes, investments, and financial planning for nearly 30 years. Losing him had felt like losing a trusted friend and advisor all at once. During dinner, I'd made what I thought was a harmless comment about feeling a bit swamped with all the financial documentation that needed organizing. It was just venting, the kind of thing you share with family when you're feeling temporarily stressed. I wasn't asking for help. I wasn't suggesting I couldn't manage. I was simply sharing a moment of frustration the way families do. But Garrett had seized on that comment like a shark detecting blood in the water. "Mom, you absolutely shouldn't be dealing with all that complexity alone," he'd said immediately, abandoning his dinner to give me his full attention. "Let me and Cassandra help you get everything organized. We're both financially savvy, and Cassie's actually really good with this stuff. She managed her father's entire portfolio before he passed. At the time, I'd thought it was sweet. My successful son wanting to help his aging mother. What kind of person would see something sinister in that? But then the help had evolved into something else entirely. Within days, the casual offer had transformed into persistent pressure. Phone calls every other day asking intrusive questions about my bank balances, investment portfolios, and property holdings. Texts requesting my online banking passwords, just to help secure your accounts against hackers. Emails containing links to articles about elder financial abuse, with key passages highlighted and accompanied by messages like, "This is why we're worried about you handling everything alone." The suggestions started flowing like a steady drip of poison disguised as medicine. I should consolidate my 3 different bank accounts into one, for simplicity. I should sell my rental properties and put everything into a managed fund, to reduce stress. I should close my safe deposit box at Riverton First National and move everything to their bank, where we can help you keep track of it. Each suggestion, taken individually, might have seemed reasonable. But collectively, they formed a picture that made my skin crawl. They wanted access to everything. They wanted control of everything. And they wanted me to hand it all over willingly, with a smile, believing I was being cared for rather than robbed. Cassandra had been particularly insidious in her approach. She'd started showing up at my house unannounced, always with some plausible excuse. She was in the neighborhood and thought she'd drop by to see if I needed anything from the grocery store. She'd happened to see that my gutters looked clogged and wanted to arrange for someone to clean them. She'd noticed that my garden was looking overgrown and knew the perfect landscaper who could help. Each visit came with gentle commentary about how overwhelming it must be to maintain a large house at my age, how exhausting property management must be, how complicated modern finances had become. Always delivered with a sympathetic smile and a concerned hand on my arm, as if she genuinely cared about my well-being rather than inventorying my assets. The real assault had begun 2 weeks ago when they'd invited me to dinner at Garrett's penthouse. I'd arrived expecting a pleasant evening with my son and his girlfriend, perhaps some good wine and conversation. Instead, I'd walked into what could only be described as an ambush disguised as a family meeting. The dining table had been pushed to the side. In its place, Cassandra had set up a projector screen and laptop. She'd created an actual PowerPoint presentation, complete with graphs, statistics, and bullet points, all professionally designed with a color scheme of concerned blues and trustworthy grays. "Eleanor," she'd begun, using my first name with a familiarity that had always grated on me, "Garrett and I have been doing extensive research on senior financial security and the critical importance of family oversight in preventing exploitation." She'd clicked to the first slide, which showed alarming statistics about financial fraud targeting seniors. Red numbers jumped out from the screen: billions of dollars lost annually, thousands of victims, average losses of hundreds of thousands per person. "Did you know," Cassandra had continued in her practice presentation voice, "that financial exploitation of seniors is one of the fastest growing crimes in America? The perpetrators are often caregivers, financial advisors, or even family members who take advantage of declining cognitive function or simple trust." I'd sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, staring at this woman who was essentially a stranger lecturing me about my own vulnerability. "Are you suggesting someone is trying to steal from me?" "Of course not," Garrett had jumped in smoothly, too quickly, like he'd rehearsed this response. "Nobody's saying that at all, Mom. We're just trying to educate you about the risks that exist. Knowledge is power, right? We want you to be informed about the dangers so you can protect yourself. Which is exactly why," Cassandra had clicked to the next slide, "we believe it's crucial for you to grant Garrett power of attorney over your financial affairs. Not because you're incapable, but because it creates a legal framework of protection and oversight." Power of attorney. The words had hung in the air like a threat wrapped in concern. The slide on the screen outlined what power of attorney entailed: the ability to access bank accounts, manage investments, buy and sell property, make financial decisions, and essentially control every aspect of someone's financial life. It was presented as protection, but all I could see was complete control. That seems extreme, I'd said carefully, setting down my fork because my hands had started trembling. I'm healthy. My mind is perfectly sharp. I don't see why I would need to sign over legal control of my finances to anyone. It's not about need right now, Mom. Garrett had leaned forward, his expression arranged into what was probably meant to be caring concern but looked more like frustrated determination. It's about being prepared for what might happen. What if you had a stroke tomorrow? What if you were in a car accident and unconscious for weeks? What if you developed dementia? Someone needs to be legally authorized to access your accounts and make critical financial decisions on your behalf. That's all we're talking about here. Just a safety net, a contingency plan. Cassandra had nodded along enthusiastically, clicking to another slide that showed a flowchart of crisis management without proper legal authority. My mother actually did this with my older brother when she turned 65, she'd added, her voice warm with false camaraderie. She said it gave her incredible peace of mind knowing that if anything happened to her, someone she trusted could handle everything smoothly. It's really just responsible planning. The presentation had gone on for another 30 minutes, each slide more persuasive than the last, each argument more carefully constructed to make refusal seem irrational, selfish, or dangerously naive. By the time they'd finished, I'd felt exhausted, confused, and vaguely guilty for not immediately agreeing to their helpful suggestion. I'd left that dinner promising to think about it, hoping they'd drop the subject and let me maintain control of my own life. But instead, they'd launched what could only be described as a campaign of persistent pressure. The text messages started the very next morning. Just wanted to send you this article about estate planning. Really important stuff. Followed by links to websites about the dangers of aging without proper legal safeguards. The phone calls came every 2 or 3 days. Hey Mom, just checking in. Have you had a chance to think about what we discussed? We really think this is important. Cassandra started showing up even more frequently, always with some excuse, always steering the conversation back to my future security and the smart decision I should make. Then came the hospital incident. I'd had a routine colonoscopy scheduled, a standard preventive procedure I'd been having done every 5 years since I turned 50. It required sedation, but I'd be home the same day, fully recovered within hours. I'd mentioned the appointment to Garrett casually, not thinking anything of it. The morning of the procedure, Garrett and Cassandra had shown up at Riverton Memorial Hospital, claiming they'd come to support me and make sure I got home safely. I'd been touched at first, thinking perhaps I'd been too harsh in judging their motives. But after the procedure, when I was still groggy from the sedation, a hospital administrator had come into my recovery room with paperwork. Mrs. Hastings, your son mentioned you wanted to add him as an authorized decision-maker on your medical records. We just need you to sign these forms. Even drugged and disoriented, alarm bells had gone off in my head. I never said that. Garrett had appeared immediately, all concern and gentle persuasion. Mom, you're confused from the medication. We talked about this last week, remember? It's just a medical proxy, so if anything happens and you can't make decisions, I can communicate with your doctors. It's standard procedure. Had we talked about it? I couldn't remember. The sedation was making everything fuzzy. Cassandra had been there too, holding my hand, telling me it was no big deal and just a formality. I'd been on the verge of signing when a nurse I'd known for years, Patricia Chin, had entered the room. She'd taken one look at the situation and her eyes had narrowed. Eleanor needs to be fully recovered before signing any legal documents, Patricia had said firmly, removing the clipboard from my hands. Hospital policy. Once the sedation has completely worn off and she's been evaluated as having full mental clarity, she can sign whatever she wants. But not while she's still under the influence of medication. The disappointment on Garrett and Cassandra's faces had been unmistakable. But they'd covered it quickly with understanding smiles and comments about, of course, we completely understand, and we just want what's best for Mom. That incident had opened my eyes to how far they were willing to go. They'd tried to catch me in a vulnerable, drugged state to obtain my signature on legal documents. What kind of people did that to someone they claimed to love and protect? After that, the pressure had intensified even further. They'd started making comments about my forgetfulness. Little remarks dropped into conversations like poison in a well. "Mom, you told us that story about your trip to Gloucester Harbor already. Last week, remember?" I hadn't told them that story. It was the first time I'd mentioned it. "You seem confused about what day we scheduled dinner. It was always Thursday, but you keep insisting it was Wednesday." It had been Wednesday. Garrett had changed it without telling me, then gaslit me into doubting my own memory. "We noticed you'd been having trouble finding the right words lately. You called the refrigerator the cold box yesterday." I'd been making a joke, using the old-fashioned term my grandmother had used. They deliberately misinterpreted it as cognitive decline. Each comment was carefully calculated to make me doubt myself, to make others doubt me, and to build a narrative that I was experiencing mental deterioration that justified taking control of my affairs, for my own protection. The truly frightening part was how subtle it was. To outsiders, they were the loving son and caring girlfriend worried about an aging mother. Any resistance on my part could be reframed as exactly the kind of irrational stubbornness that proved I needed intervention. I'd felt myself being backed into a corner with no good options. Refuse, and they'd escalate, possibly pursuing legal guardianship by painting me as incompetent. Agree, and I'd be handing over everything I'd worked for to people whose motives I no longer trusted. Which brought me to today, standing in Garrett's penthouse, surrounded by my life's documentation spread across his dining table like evidence at a crime scene. "The notary will be here in 15 minutes, Garrett said, checking his Rolex, a watch I knew cost $15,000, purchased somehow on his modest marketing executive salary. "We should get the power of attorney forms ready for you to sign." My blood ran cold. "You scheduled a notary? Before I even agreed to do this?" Cassandra laughed lightly, a sound like wind chimes that set my teeth on edge. "Well, we knew you'd make the smart decision eventually. We're just trying to be efficient with everyone's time. The notary is a mobile service, costs $200 just for the house call. We didn't want to waste that money if you weren't serious about moving forward." The presumption was breathtaking. They'd arranged everything, scheduled everything, decided everything, as if my consent was just a formality to be checked off a list. "Let me see the documents," I said, hearing how small my voice sounded in that cavernous penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Millbrook's downtown skyline. Cassandra practically bounced over to the kitchen counter, where a leather folder sat waiting. She'd had everything prepared. Of course she had. She handed me the folder with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's all very straightforward. Just a standard durable power of attorney for property. Garrett will be able to help manage your accounts, pay your bills, handle property issues, all the tedious stuff that takes up so much of your time and energy." I opened the folder with trembling hands and began reading. The legal language was dense, full of whereas and heretofores, but the meaning was crystal clear. By signing this document, I would be granting Garrett comprehensive authority over every financial aspect of my life. He would have the power to access all my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and safe deposit boxes. He could sell my property, including my home and the lakeside cabin in Northwood that Vincent and I had built together 42 years ago. He could make investments on my behalf, change beneficiaries on my accounts, and essentially control every dollar I owned. The document did include language about acting in my best interests and maintaining my well-being, but those were subjective terms with no real enforcement mechanism. Once I signed this, Garrett would have nearly unlimited power over my finances, and I would have virtually no recourse if he abused that power. "This is very broad," I said, looking up at my son. "This gives you control over everything." "It has to be comprehensive, Mom," Garrett said, his tone taking on that patient explaining to a child quality that made my jaw clench. "If it's too limited, it defeats the whole purpose. We need to be able to handle any financial situation that might arise. That's the whole point of proper planning. And you'll still make all the actual decisions," Cassandra added, perching on the arm of the leather sofa like a bird of prey taking a rest. Garrett will just be able to execute those decisions on your behalf. Think of him as your financial assistant, not your financial controller. But that wasn't what the legal document said. The legal document said Garrett would have authority to make decisions, not just execute mine. The distinction was crucial, and they were deliberately obscuring it. The doorbell rang, sharp and intrusive in the tense silence. Perfect timing, Garrett said with obviously forced brightness. That'll be the notary. He opened the door to reveal a woman in her late 30s wearing business casual attire and carrying a professional bag. She had the efficient, seen-it-all demeanor of someone who'd notarized thousands of documents and learned not to ask questions about family dynamics. "Good afternoon," she said, stepping inside. "I'm Monica Brennan, certified notary public. I understand we're executing a power of attorney today." "That's right," Garrett said, gesturing toward me. "For my mother, Eleanor Hastings." Monica sat up at the dining table with practiced efficiency, clearing a space among my scattered documents. She pulled out her notary stamp, journal, and forms with the smooth movements of routine. "Mrs. Hastings, I'll need to see your identification and verify that you're signing this document of your own free will, without coercion or undue influence." I pulled out my driver's license with numb fingers and handed it to her. She examined it carefully, then looked at me with professional assessment. "Are you signing this document voluntarily, Mrs. Hastings?" Was I? With my son and his girlfriend watching me expectantly, with months of pressure and manipulation behind me, with the implicit threat of guardianship proceedings hanging over my head if I refused, could this really be called voluntary? But what came out of my mouth was, yes. Monica nodded and made notes in her journal. "And do you understand the contents of this document and the authority you're granting?" Yes. I understand. It wasn't really a lie. I did understand. I understood that I was about to hand over control of everything I'd worked for to a son I no longer recognized and a woman I didn't trust. I understood that I was walking into a trap I couldn't see the full dimensions of yet. I understood that something was very, very wrong with this entire situation. But I also understood that refusing at this point would only make things worse. If they were willing to go this far, they wouldn't stop just because I said no. They'd find another way, probably one that left me with even less control and dignity. At least this way, I'd bought myself time to figure out what they were really after and how to protect myself. Monica laid out the power of attorney document and pointed to the signature line. "Please sign here, and date it." I picked up the pen she offered, and for just a moment, I hesitated. This was it. The point of no return. Once I signed this, everything changed. "Mom?" Garrett's voice carried an edge of anxiety disguised as concern. "Are you okay?" I looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for any trace of the son I'd raised. The boy who'd cried when I couldn't afford to buy him the expensive sneakers his friends had. The teenager who'd worked 2 part-time jobs to help pay for his college applications. The young man who'd promised at his father's funeral that he'd always take care of me, that I'd never have to worry about anything as long as he was around. Where had that person gone? Or had he ever really existed outside my hopeful imagination? I signed my name. Eleanor Marie Hastings. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like I was signing away more than legal authority. I was signing away my independence, my autonomy, my right to control my own destiny. Monica witnessed my signature, added her notarial seal with practiced efficiency, and made the final entries in her journal. All set. The document is now legally binding. Legally binding. The words echoed in my head like a prison door slamming shut. Wonderful. Cassandra appeared beside me with champagne flutes, apparently having anticipated this moment enough to have a bottle chilling. This calls for a celebration. To family, to taking care of each other, and to Eleanor's secure and stress-free future. The champagne tasted like ashes in my mouth, but I forced myself to take a sip and smile. I needed them to think I was compliant, cooperative, relieved even. I needed them to believe they'd won completely so I could figure out what game they were really playing. As Monica packed up her things and left, Garrett carefully placed the signed power of attorney document in a folder. I noticed he didn't offer me a copy. Shouldn't I have a copy of that? I asked, trying to sound casual rather than suspicious. Of course, Mom, Garrett said smoothly. We'll get you a certified copy once we've filed everything properly with the county recorder's office and your bank. No point in giving you an uncertified copy that won't be recognized officially. We'll make sure you have all the proper documentation within the next week or two. Or 2. Or 3. Or never. I heard what he wasn't saying. Cassandra settled onto the sofa with her champagne, looking like a cat who'd just cornered a particularly plump mouse. So, Eleanor, now that we have the power of attorney handled, we need to discuss the next steps in properly securing your assets. Next steps? My stomach clenched. Well, yes. The power of attorney is just the legal framework. Now we need to actually organize and consolidate your holdings so we can effectively manage everything. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what looked like a detailed checklist. We'll need your safe deposit box key and the combinations to your home safe. We need to get you set up with online access to all your investment accounts using passwords we can share. And we should schedule a meeting with your bank to add Garrett as a joint account holder on your primary checking and savings. Joint account holder. Safe combinations. Complete access to everything. That seems like a lot to do all at once, I said carefully. Maybe we should take this in stages? Garrett sat down on the other side of me, effectively boxing me in. Mom, I know this feels overwhelming, but it's important to do it comprehensively. If we do it piecemeal, things will slip through the cracks. That defeats the whole purpose of organized financial management. Besides, Cassandra added with that smile that never touched her eyes, the sooner we get everything properly organized, the sooner you can truly relax and stop worrying about all these financial details. Isn't that what you want? To stop feeling stressed about money management? What I wanted was to go home, lock my doors, and try to figure out how I'd lost control of my entire life in the span of a single afternoon. But instead, I found myself nodding weakly. I don't have the safe information with me right now, I said. That's perfectly fine, Garrett replied, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You can bring everything by this Saturday. Let's say around 2 o'clock. We'll make a nice lunch of it, you can hand over the keys and combinations, and we'll walk through setting up all the shared access to your accounts. Should only take a few hours. A few hours to hand over every remaining shred of financial privacy and control I had left. Saturday at 2, I repeated, feeling like I was scheduling my own execution. I left Garrett's penthouse an hour later, my head spinning and my hands shaking as I drove home through Millbrook's early evening traffic. The folder containing the power of attorney document remained on Garrett's kitchen counter. I had no copy, no proof of what I'd signed except my own memory and the sinking certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. As I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car staring at the house I'd lived in for 47 years, I felt completely untethered from reality. How had this happened? How had my own son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, transformed into someone I barely recognized? Someone who looked at me with calculation rather than love? Someone who was systematically taking control of everything I owned? And why were they so insistent on accessing my safe? What did they think was in there? Or, and this thought made my blood run cold, what were they planning to put in there that they didn't want me to see or know about? I sat in my car as darkness fell around me, staring at my house, and realized that I was no longer safe in my own life. My son had legal power over my finances. He would soon have physical access to my most secure possessions. And I had no idea what he planned to do with that power. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty, whatever Garrett and Cassandra were planning, it wasn't about helping me. It was about taking everything I had. And I just signed the document that gave them the legal authority to do exactly that. The days following the power of attorney signing felt like living in a fog. I'd wake up each morning in my comfortable bedroom, the same room I'd slept in for 47 years, and for a few blissful seconds I'd forget what I'd done. Then reality would crash back over me like a cold wave, and I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let myself be maneuvered into signing away control of my entire financial life. Thursday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold while I stared at nothing in particular. The house felt different somehow, like it wasn't fully mine anymore. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, every dish in my cupboard, all of it now existed under the shadow of that power of attorney document sitting in Garrett's penthouse. My phone buzzed with a text message. Garrett. Morning, Mom. Just wanted to let you know we've started the process of organizing your accounts. Need you to send us the account numbers for your investment portfolio at Riverside Wealth Management. Also, what bank is your mortgage through? We want to make sure we have complete records. Thanks. I stared at the message, my heart rate picking up. It had been less than 48 hours since I'd signed the document, and he was already requesting detailed information about my accounts. The speed of it felt aggressive, like he couldn't wait to get his hands on everything. I typed back slowly, I can bring all that information on Saturday when we meet. The response came within seconds, actually, we need it sooner. We're meeting with a financial advisor tomorrow to discuss your portfolio optimization. Send the info by end of day today, please. Portfolio optimization. The words sounded professional and helpful, but they filled me with dread. What did optimization mean? Selling my carefully chosen investments and moving the money into accounts Garrett controlled? Liquidating assets I'd spent decades building? Before I could respond, another text arrived, this one from Cassandra. Hi Eleanor. Quick question, do you have any life insurance policies we don't know about? We're creating a comprehensive asset inventory and want to make sure we capture everything. Also, are you the beneficiary on any accounts from Vincent's estate? Just trying to be thorough. Smiling face with smiling eyes, the casual invasion of my privacy, delivered with an emoji, made my stomach turn. They weren't even pretending to respect boundaries anymore. The power of attorney had been signed, and now they felt entitled to know every detail of my financial life immediately. I set my phone down without responding to either message and walked to my home office, a small converted bedroom where I'd managed my real estate business for 30 years before retiring. The room was lined with filing cabinets containing decades of financial records, property documents, and personal files. Everything organized, everything in its place. I pulled open the drawer labeled Insurance and Estate Planning, and withdrew a folder I hadn't looked at in several years. Inside was the policy information for a life insurance policy Vincent had taken out when Garrett was born. $500,000 in coverage, with me as the beneficiary. I'd never touched it, never needed it. The monthly premiums came out automatically from my checking account, something I barely noticed among my other bills. Why was Cassandra suddenly asking about life insurance? Why the urgency in cataloging every asset I owned? A terrible thought began forming in my mind, one so dark I didn't want to acknowledge it. But once it was there, I couldn't ignore it. If something happened to me, who would inherit everything? Garrett was my only child, my sole heir. With the power of attorney giving him control of my finances while I was alive, and inheritance laws giving him everything when I died, he would effectively own my entire life's work. Was I being paranoid? Was I letting fear turn my own son into a villain in my imagination? But then I remembered the hospital incident, trying to get me to sign documents while I was sedated. I remembered the months of pressure and manipulation. I remembered the cold calculation in his eyes when he'd watched me sign away my financial autonomy. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Garrett. Mom, we really need that information today. This is important. The financial advisor charges by the hour and we can't waste his time with incomplete data. Please send the account numbers ASAP. The demanding tone, the implied criticism that I was being difficult or uncooperative by not immediately complying, it was all part of the same pattern. They'd been gradually escalating their control, and now that they had the legal authority, the pretense of patience and understanding was falling away. I typed back, I'll get you the information by Saturday as we agreed. This time, my phone actually rang. Garrett calling. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello? Mom, I don't think you're understanding the urgency here. His voice was tight with barely controlled frustration. We're trying to help you, but you keep making things difficult. All we're asking for is some account numbers. Why are you being so resistant? I'm not being resistant, Garrett. I'm simply saying that I'll bring all the information on Saturday as we planned. That's only 2 days away. 2 days during which we can't properly assess your financial situation or make informed decisions about protecting your assets. Do you realize how irresponsible that is? We have legal authority to manage your finances now, Mom. That means we need access to the information required to do that job properly. The shift in his tone was remarkable. No more gentle persuasion or patient explanation. Now it was direct demand backed by legal authority. I understand that, but I'm not comfortable sending sensitive financial information via text message. We can go through everything in person on Saturday. A long pause. Then, fine. Saturday. But I need you to understand something, Mom. We're doing this with or without your cooperation. We have the power of attorney, which means we can contact your banks and investment firms directly. We can request records, access accounts, and make changes without your involvement. We're trying to include you in the process out of respect, but don't mistake that courtesy for a requirement. We don't actually need your permission anymore. The words hung in the air like a threat. He was right, of course. The power of attorney gave him the legal authority to do exactly what he described. By signing that document, I'd given him the keys to my financial kingdom, and now he was making sure I understood that he didn't need me to unlock the doors anymore. He could kick them down if he chose to. I'll see you Saturday, I said quietly, and hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. The son I'd raised would never have spoken to me that way. That boy had been kind, considerate, grateful for the sacrifices I'd made. This man was someone else entirely, someone who saw me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a mother to be respected. I spent the rest of Thursday in my office, going through my files with new eyes. I made copies of everything important: bank statements, investment records, property deeds, insurance policies. I created a separate folder with duplicates of all my most critical documents. If Garrett and Cassandra were going to take control of my financial life, I needed to at least have a record of what existed before they started optimizing things. As I worked, I kept coming back to their insistence on accessing my safe. What was in my home safe that they were so eager to get to? I walked downstairs to my bedroom and stood in front of the closet, looking at the wall safe installed behind my winter coats. The combination was the same one I'd set when Vincent and I had it installed 32 years ago, August 17, 55, the date we'd gotten married. Inside the safe were things I'd considered too valuable or important for a bank deposit box. My grandmother's diamond engagement ring, passed down through 3 generations. The title to my house, fully paid off after 30 years of mortgage payments. Stock certificates for shares in a pharmaceutical company that Vincent had worked for, now worth considerably more than when he'd received them as part of his retirement package. Some cash, maybe $8,000, that I kept for emergencies. And something else. Something I'd almost forgotten about until this moment. 3 years ago, I'd had lunch with Cassandra's ex-husband, Preston Thornfield. It had been before I knew who he was, before Cassandra had entered Garrett's life. We'd met at a charity fundraiser for Millbrook Children's Hospital, been seated at the same table, and struck up a conversation. He'd been charming and intelligent, and we'd exchanged business cards since we were both in real estate, him in commercial development, me in residential sales. Months later, he'd called me out of the blue, asking to meet for coffee. That meeting had been strange and uncomfortable. Preston had been agitated, clearly upset, and after some initial small talk, he'd asked me an odd question: "Mrs. Hastings, has your son Garrett ever mentioned a woman named Cassandra Whitley?" I'd been confused. "No, I don't think so." "Why?" "Because she's my wife. And she's been having an affair with your son for the past 6 months." The revelation had been shocking. Garrett had never mentioned dating anyone seriously, let alone being involved with a married woman. Preston had gone on to tell me about discovering their affair, about Cassandra's pattern of targeting wealthy men, about his concerns that she wasn't who she pretended to be. Then he'd handed me a flash drive. This contains evidence of Cassandra's real background. Her name isn't actually Cassandra Whitley, that's her third identity that I know of. She's been involved in at least 2 previous scams targeting older men. I've hired a private investigator, and this is what he found. I don't know what her angle is with your son, but please, for Garrett's sake, look at this information. I'd taken the flash drive, though I'd been skeptical. Preston was a man scorned, going through a painful divorce. It was possible he was making up or exaggerating things about his wife to justify his own feelings of betrayal. But I'd kept the flash drive anyway, locked it in my safe, and honestly, I'd forgotten about it. Garrett had eventually introduced me to Cassandra. She'd seemed pleasant enough if a bit too eager to please, and I dismissed Preston's warnings as the bitter accusations of a jealous husband. Now, standing in front of my safe, I wondered if I'd been wrong to dismiss those warnings. What if Preston had been telling the truth? What if Cassandra really was a con artist with a history of targeting wealthy men? And if that was true, what did it mean that she and Garrett were now systematically gaining control of every aspect of my financial life? I pulled out my phone and searched for Preston Thornfield. It took several attempts with different search terms, but I finally found a business profile on a commercial real estate website. There was a phone number listed. I hesitated for several minutes before dialing. What was I going to say? Hello, I'm the mother of the man your wife left you for, and I think they might be trying to steal from me. It sounded absurd even in my own head. But I dialed anyway. The phone rang 4 times before a man answered. Preston Thornfield. Mr. Thornfield, this is Eleanor Hastings. We met several years ago at a charity fundraiser, and you gave me a flash drive with information about Cassandra. His voice changed immediately, becoming alert and interested. Yes, I remember. Mrs. Hastings, I'm glad you called. I've been wondering if I should reach out to you again. Why? Has something happened? Have you looked at the information on that flash drive? No, I admitted. I didn't think it was my place to investigate my son's girlfriend based on the word of her estranged husband. No offense intended. None taken. I understand. But Mrs. Hastings, things have changed since we last spoke. Cassandra's divorce from me was finalized 8 months ago. She walked away with a significant settlement based on fraudulent claims about her contributions to my business. After the divorce, I continued investigating her background, and what I found was deeply disturbing. My grip tightened on the phone. What did you find? Cassandra Whitley isn't even her real name. She was born Jennifer Dawson in Tampa, Florida. She's been married 4 times under different names, targeting wealthy older men and extracting money through various schemes before disappearing. In 2 cases, her husbands died under suspicious circumstances shortly after signing over significant assets to her control. The room seemed to tilt. They died? One from an apparent heart attack, though he had no history of heart disease. Another from a fall down the stairs in his own home, though he'd lived there for 30 years without incident. Both deaths were ruled accidental, and both occurred within months of the men granting her power of attorney over their finances. Power of attorney. The words echoed in my head. Mr. Thornfield, I need to see that information. The flash drive you gave me, is everything still current? Most of it, though I've gathered additional evidence since then. Mrs. Hastings, why are you calling now? Has something happened? I told him. About the months of pressure, the manipulation, the power of attorney I'd signed just 2 days ago. About their demands for access to my safe and their insistence on controlling every aspect of my finances. About Garrett's transformation from caring son to cold calculator. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Mr. Thornfield? Mrs. Hastings, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're in serious danger. The pattern you're describing is exactly what Cassandra did to her previous targets. She uses a romantic partner, in this case, your son, to gain access to an elderly person's finances. They work together to isolate the victim, gain legal control of assets, and then something unfortunate happens. You're saying they're planning to kill me? The words sounded ridiculous saying them out loud, like something from a crime drama rather than real life. I'm saying you need to take this threat seriously. Cassandra is extremely dangerous, and if she's influenced your son to participate in her scheme, he's dangerous too. You need to protect yourself immediately. How? I've already signed the power of attorney. They have legal authority over my finances. Power of attorney can be revoked. You need to contact a lawyer today, not someone they recommend, someone independent. You need to document everything that's happened and prepare to revoke that authority before they can do any serious damage. And Mrs. Hastings? Yes? Don't go to that meeting on Saturday. Don't give them access to your safe. Whatever they're planning requires getting their hands on something in that safe. Don't let them have it. After hanging up with Preston, I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at the closet that concealed my safe. What did they want from in there? The jewelry? The cash? Those things had value, but not enough to justify this elaborate scheme. Then I remembered the stock certificates. Vincent's pharmaceutical company shares. I'd tucked them away decades ago and barely thought about them since. What if those shares were worth more than I'd realized? I pulled out my laptop and looked up the company, Nexbridge Pharmaceuticals. What I found made my breath catch. The company had been acquired 2 years ago by a major medical conglomerate. The acquisition had made headlines because of its value, $4.2 billion. And according to the terms of Vincent's original retirement package, his shares were part of a special class that would increase in value exponentially in the event of an acquisition. With shaking hands, I calculated what Vincent's original 50,000 shares would now be worth based on the acquisition terms. $3.7 million. I had stock certificates worth $3.7 million sitting in my safe, and I'd completely forgotten about them. That's what Cassandra and Garrett were after. Not my house or my retirement savings or my life insurance. They wanted those stock certificates. And once they had access to my safe, they could take them, forge my signature on the transfer documents, and cash out before I even realized what had happened. Or worse, they could make sure I never realized what had happened. If I had an unfortunate accident shortly after they gained access to my safe, Garrett would inherit everything anyway, and no one would question his right to cash out his deceased mother's stocks. My phone buzzed. Another text from Cassandra, Eleanor, just confirming you'll have the safe combination ready for Saturday. Also, Garrett mentioned you might have some old stock certificates. If you do, we should definitely get those re-registered in electronic form. Paper certificates are so vulnerable to damage or loss. See you Saturday. 2 hearts, they weren't even being subtle anymore. They knew exactly what was in that safe, or at least they strongly suspected, and they were counting down the hours until they could get their hands on it. I looked at the clock. It was 2:30 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. I had less than 48 hours before that Saturday meeting, and I needed to figure out how to protect myself and my assets before Garrett and Cassandra could execute whatever plan they devised. First, I needed to see what was on Preston's flash drive. I retrieved it from my safe and plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained dozens of files, court documents, private investigator reports, photographs, financial records, and news articles. I spent the next 3 hours reading, and with each page, my horror grew. Jennifer Dawson, aka Cassandra Whitley, aka Catherine Morrison, aka Sandra Wright, had been running variations of this scam for at least 15 years. She'd target wealthy older men, charm them into relationships, gain access to their finances, and then systematically drain their accounts. The pattern was always the same: initial romance, gradual financial entanglement, power of attorney, and then either abandonment after the money was gone or, in 2 cases, suspicious deaths followed by inheritance. But this time, she'd modified her approach. Instead of targeting an elderly man directly, she'd attached herself to a middle-aged son and was using him to gain access to his mother's wealth. It was clever, actually, less suspicious than a young woman suddenly appearing in an elderly widow's life, and more effective because the son could apply family pressure that an outsider couldn't. The question was, did Garrett know what she really was? Was he a willing accomplice in this scheme, Or was he being manipulated just like I was? I wanted to believe my son was a victim too, that Cassandra had deceived him and he didn't realize he was helping her rob his own mother. But then I remembered his cold tone on the phone, his threatening words about not needing my cooperation anymore, the calculated way he'd pressured me to sign the power of attorney. No. Garrett knew exactly what he was doing. Whether Cassandra had corrupted him or simply awakened something that had always been there, he was a willing participant in this scheme. I was still sitting at my desk, surrounded by evidence of my son's betrayal, when my doorbell rang at 6 p.m. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and after everything I'd learned, an unexpected visitor felt threatening. I walked quietly to the front door and looked through the peephole. Garrett and Cassandra stood on my porch, both smiling, Cassandra holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. My heart hammered against my ribs. They weren't supposed to come until Saturday. What were they doing here now? The doorbell rang again, and Cassandra called out cheerfully, "Eleanor. We know you're home, we saw your car in the garage. We brought dinner." I took a breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. If I didn't answer, it would seem suspicious. I needed to appear normal, compliant, unsuspecting. I needed them to think their plan was working perfectly. I opened the door with what I hoped was a welcoming smile. "Garrett, Cassandra. What a surprise. I wasn't expecting you until Saturday." "We felt bad about being so pushy on the phone earlier," Garrett said, though his eyes didn't match his apologetic words. "We brought you some dinner as a peace offering. Cassie made her famous chicken enchilada casserole." They moved into my house before I'd explicitly invited them in, and I found myself stepping back automatically. Cassandra headed straight for my kitchen like she owned the place, setting the casserole on my counter and starting to pull plates from my cupboard. "You really didn't need to do this," I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the alarm bells screaming in my head. "Of course we did," Cassandra said, smiling that sharp smile that no longer fooled me. "Your family, Eleanor. And family takes care of each other." She emphasized the word family in a way that made my skin crawl, like she was claiming a relationship she had no right to. Garrett wandered into my living room, his gaze roaming over everything with an assessing quality. "House is looking good, Mom. You've kept it up well." "Thank you," I said, watching him carefully. "Must be a lot of work though, maintaining a place this size all by yourself. Have you thought any more about what we discussed about maybe downsizing? Moving into something more manageable?" We'd never discussed me downsizing. That was a conversation he'd just invented, another piece of the narrative they were building. "I'm happy here," I said firmly. "For now," Cassandra interjected, bringing plates to my dining room table. "But Eleanor, you have to think long-term. What happens in 5 years when stairs become difficult? When yard work becomes impossible?" Garrett and I have been looking at some lovely senior living communities. Much easier than maintaining a whole house. Senior living communities. They wanted me out of my house, away from my safe, isolated in some facility where they could control my access to my own belongings. "Let's eat before the food gets cold," I said, desperate to change the subject. We sat down to dinner, and I forced myself to take bites of the casserole while Garrett and Cassandra maintained a steady stream of cheerful conversation. But I noticed things I'd been blind to before. The way Cassandra's eyes constantly scanned my home, cataloging and assessing. The way Garrett's gaze kept drifting toward my bedroom, where my safe was hidden. The undercurrent of tension beneath their forced casualness. They were here to scout. To see the layout of my house, to identify where things were kept, to plan their next moves. "So, Mom," Garrett said, setting down his fork. "Since we're here anyway, why don't you just give us that safe combination now? Save us all the trouble on Saturday." There it was. The real reason for this surprise visit. "I don't remember it off the top of my head," I lied. "I have it written down somewhere, but I'd have to look for it. It'll be easier to just bring it on Saturday like we planned." Garrett's jaw tightened. "You don't remember your own safe combination? It's been years since I've needed to open it." I keep the combination in a secure place precisely because I don't want to rely on memory. Cassandra laughed lightly, but there was an edge to it. That seems a bit paranoid, doesn't it? Keeping your own safe combination locked away from yourself? It's how I've always done it, I said, meeting her eyes and seeing the flash of irritation there. Well, why don't we look for it now? Garrett stood up, already moving toward my office. I'm sure between the three of us, we can find it. Garrett, stop. I stood up too, my voice sharper than I'd intended. This is still my house. I've told you I'll provide the information on Saturday. Please respect that. The room went silent. Garrett and Cassandra exchanged a look that contained entire conversations I couldn't hear. Mom, Garrett said slowly, turning back to face me. I feel like you're not fully embracing this new arrangement. We have power of attorney now. That means we're responsible for your financial security, which includes securing your valuables. We're not asking permission. We're informing you of what needs to happen. And I'm informing you that Saturday works better for me. Another long look passed between them. Then Cassandra set down her napkin with exaggerated calm. Eleanor, I think we need to have a frank conversation. Garrett and I are concerned about your cognitive state. You're showing signs of confusion, resistance to help, paranoid behavior around security. These are classic early indicators of dementia. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. I don't have dementia, I said, working to keep my voice steady. That's often the first sign, Cassandra continued in that condescending clinical tone. Patients don't recognize their own decline. That's why family intervention is so important. Garrett, I think we need to schedule that appointment with Dr. Ramsey sooner rather than later. Dr. Ramsey. I didn't know anyone by that name. Who's Dr. Ramsey? I asked. A geriatric psychiatrist we've been consulting with about your situation, Garrett said. We've been documenting concerning behaviors, the forgetfulness, the repetition of stories, the confusion about dates and times. Dr. Ramsey thinks you should come in for a comprehensive cognitive assessment. They'd been building a medical case against me. Documenting alleged symptoms. Consulting with doctors without my knowledge. Creating a paper trail that could be used to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate with their plans. I'm not seeing any doctor I haven't chosen myself, I said. See? Cassandra gestured toward me like I was evidence of her point. This is exactly the kind of irrational resistance we've been talking about. Eleanor, dear, we're trying to help you. Why are you making this so difficult? Because you're trying to rob me and possibly kill me, I thought but didn't say. Instead, I straightened my spine and channeled every ounce of dignity I possessed. I'd like you both to leave now. We can continue this conversation on Saturday as planned. Mom, Garrett started. Now, Garrett. This is still my house, and I'm asking you to leave. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. His face flushed with anger, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But then Cassandra touched his arm gently. It's fine, darling. Let's give Eleanor some time to think things over. We'll see her Saturday, and hopefully she'll be more reasonable after she's had a chance to calm down. They gathered their things with theatrical reluctance, Cassandra taking the casserole dish back with pointed emphasis, as if I didn't deserve their generosity if I wasn't going to cooperate fully. At the door, Garrett turned back to me. Mom, I want you to understand something. We're doing this with or without your cooperation. We have the legal authority. We have the documentation of your declining capacity. If you continue to be difficult, we'll have no choice but to pursue a conservatorship. And then you won't have any say at all in how your life is managed. A conservatorship. Legal guardianship for adults deemed incapable of managing their own affairs. Once that was in place, I'd effectively become a child again, with Garrett and Cassandra controlling every aspect of my life. I'll see you Saturday, I said, and closed the door in their faces. I watched through the window as they walked to Garrett's car, saw them talking animatedly, Cassandra gesturing with obvious agitation. Then they drove away, and I was alone with the horrifying realization of what I was facing. My son wasn't just trying to steal from me. He was threatening to have me declared incompetent if I didn't hand over everything willingly. And the worst part was, he had the power to do it. With his power of attorney, his documented concerns about my mental state, and his testimony about my confused and resistant behavior, he could probably convince a court that I needed a conservator. I'd been so careful my whole life. I'd worked hard, saved diligently, made smart decisions. And now, at 70 years old, I was facing the complete loss of my autonomy at the hands of my own child. But I wasn't helpless. Not yet. I returned to my computer and began researching lawyers who specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. I made a list of the top 5 firms in Millbrook and the surrounding area. First thing Friday morning, I would start making calls. I also opened a new document and began writing down everything, every conversation, every text message, every suspicious behavior. I needed documentation of my own, evidence that I was being manipulated and threatened, proof that my resistance was rational rather than a sign of cognitive decline. As I worked late into the night, one thought kept circling through my mind. I had less than 48 hours until that Saturday meeting. Less than 48 hours to protect myself, my assets, and possibly my life. Because I now understood with chilling certainty that Cassandra and Garrett weren't planning to just steal from me and disappear. They were planning something more permanent. They wanted everything I had, and the only way to ensure I couldn't interfere or report them was to make sure I wasn't around to object. Saturday at 2 p.m. wasn't a meeting. It was a trap. And I'd walked right into it by signing that power of attorney. But I still had time. Not much, but enough to fight back. And that's exactly what I planned to do. Friday morning arrived with the weight of impending crisis. I'd barely slept, lying awake planning and replaying every conversation, every threat, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. As dawn broke over Millbrook, I was already at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee and a legal pad covered in notes. The first call I made was to Preston Thornfield at exactly 8 a.m. "Mrs. Hastings," he answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call back." "I need your help," I said without preamble. "I need copies of everything you have on Cassandra, Jennifer, whoever she really is. And I need the name of a lawyer who can help me revoke this power of attorney before tomorrow's meeting. I can do better than that. I can be at your house in 2 hours with everything you need, including my attorney, Richard Chin. He's the best elder law specialist in the state, and he helped me through my divorce from Cassandra. He knows exactly how she operates." 2 hours, I confirmed. "But Preston, I need to know, why are you helping me? You could just walk away from all of this." There was a long pause. "Because I didn't walk away the first time, and someone else might have died because of my inaction. After my divorce was finalized, I discovered that Cassandra had been targeting another man, a 68-year-old widower in Portland. I tried to warn him, sent him the evidence, but he didn't believe me. Thought I was a bitter ex-husband making things up." His voice caught. "He died 3 months later. Fell down the stairs, just like one of her other victims. I'm not letting that happen again." After hanging up with Preston, I methodically went through my house with my phone, documenting everything. I photographed my safe, still locked and secure. I took pictures of every room, every valuable item, creating a visual inventory of my possessions. If Garrett and Cassandra tried to claim I'd given them things or that items had gone missing, I'd have proof of what existed before they gained full access to my home. Then I did something that felt like the final severing of the mother-son bond I'd cherished for 52 years. I went to my home security system panel and changed all the access codes. Garrett had a key to my house and knew the old alarm code. As of this morning, that code no longer worked. If he tried to enter my house without my permission, the alarm would trigger and the police would be notified. It felt like locking my own child out of my life, and despite everything, despite knowing what he was planning, the action brought tears to my eyes. This was my son. The baby I'd rocked to sleep. The boy I'd cheered for at every soccer game. The young man whose college graduation had been one of the proudest moments of my life. But that person was gone, if he'd ever truly existed. In his place was a man who saw his own mother as nothing more than an obstacle between him and $3.7 million. At 10 a.m. sharp, Preston Thornfield arrived with Richard Chin, a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. They came bearing 3 file boxes full of documentation about Cassandra's history. We spread everything out on my dining room table, and for the next hour, Richard went through it all with the methodical precision of someone who'd dealt with financial predators before. "This is extensive," he said, studying a timeline Preston had created of Cassandra's known scams. "Jennifer Dawson has been running variations of this con since she was 23 years old. She's 34 now, which means 11 years of perfecting her technique. She's good at what she does, which makes her extremely dangerous. Can we stop her?" I asked. "Can we protect my assets and get the power of attorney revoked before tomorrow?" Richard looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Mrs. Hastings, I'm going to be honest with you. What they've done so far is technically legal. You signed the power of attorney voluntarily, witnessed by a notary. They haven't actually stolen anything yet, they've just positioned themselves to do so. That makes our situation complicated." My heart sank. "So I'm trapped?" "I didn't say that." Richard pulled out his laptop. "Power of attorney can be revoked at any time as long as you're mentally competent to do so. The problem is, they're building a case that you're not competent. They have documentation of alleged cognitive decline, consultation with a psychiatrist, and they're threatening a conservatorship. If we revoke the power of attorney now, they'll likely respond by filing for emergency guardianship, claiming you're having a mental health crisis. So what do we do?" Richard smiled, and there was something sharp in it. "We build a better case. We document your complete mental competency with unimpeachable medical evidence. We create a paper trail showing their coercion and manipulation. And we set a trap that exposes their true intentions before they can execute their plan." "A trap?" Preston leaned forward. "Mrs. Hastings, Cassandra's weakness is her greed. She's gotten away with this for years because she's patient and careful. But when she thinks she's won, when she believes the prize is within reach, she gets bold. That's when she makes mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind we can record and use as evidence," Richard said. "But it requires you to do something difficult. You need to go to that meeting tomorrow. You need to act like you're cooperating fully. And you need to let them reveal their true intentions while we document everything." The thought of sitting across from Garrett and Cassandra tomorrow, pretending to hand over my safe combination while knowing what they planned to do with it, made my stomach turn. But I understood the strategy. "You want me to wear a wire?" "Actually, something better." Richard pulled a small device from his briefcase. "This is a recording pen. It looks like an ordinary pen, but it records everything, audio and video through a tiny camera in the clip. You keep it in your pocket with the clip visible, pointed toward them, and it captures everything they say and do. In a two-party consent state like ours, you can legally record conversations in your own home without their knowledge. But won't they be careful about what they say if I'm acting cooperative?" Preston shook his head. "That's the thing about people like Cassandra. Once they think they've won, they can't help themselves. They gloat. They reveal things. Especially if you give them the right openings." For the next 2 hours, Richard coached me on exactly what to say and do during tomorrow's meeting. We practiced scenarios, rehearsed questions I should ask that would prompt them to reveal their plans, and strategized how to keep them talking while the recording pen captured everything. Meanwhile, Preston went through every piece of evidence he had on Cassandra. "The most damning thing," he said, pulling out a set of documents, "is this. Life insurance policies taken out on 3 of her previous targets, with her as the beneficiary. All 3 policies were purchased within weeks of her obtaining power of attorney over their finances. All 3 men died within 6 months. Life insurance on other people?" I stared at the documents. "Isn't that illegal?" "Not if you have an insurable interest," Richard explained. "Which can include being financially dependent on someone, having business relationships, or in some cases, being designated as a financial manager through power of attorney. It's a gray area that Cassandra has exploited repeatedly. Do you think she's already taken out a policy on me? We can find out. Richard made some notes. I'll file requests with the major insurance companies today, asking if any policies exist with you as the insured. If one does, and Cassandra or Garrett is the beneficiary, that's powerful evidence of their intent. As the afternoon wore on, Richard drafted several documents for me to sign. First, a revocation of the power of attorney I'd granted Garrett, to be filed immediately after tomorrow's meeting once we had recorded evidence of their intentions. Second, a new durable power of attorney naming Richard Chen as my attorney in fact, effective only if I became incapacitated. Third, an emergency petition for a restraining order against both Garrett and Cassandra, to be filed if they tried to access my accounts or property after the revocation. We're building a legal fortress around you, Richard explained. But the key is tomorrow's meeting. We need them to reveal enough of their plan that we can demonstrate criminal intent, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, possibly even conspiracy to commit murder if they're foolish enough to discuss their endgame. The words, conspiracy to commit murder, hung in the air. This wasn't just about protecting my money anymore. It was about protecting my life. Richard, if we succeed tomorrow, if we get evidence and stop them, what happens to Garrett? The question hurt to ask, but I needed to know. Richard's expression softened. That depends on what he says tomorrow, what we can prove about his involvement, and what choices he makes when confronted with the evidence. If he's been manipulated by Cassandra and he cooperates once the truth comes out, he might face reduced charges or even immunity in exchange for testimony against her. But Mrs. Hastings, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that he's a willing participant. And if that's true, he'll face serious criminal charges. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. My son, potentially facing prison because of his greed and the influence of a con artist who'd twisted whatever goodness had once existed in him. After Richard and Preston left, I spent the evening preparing for tomorrow. I charged the recording pen and tested it multiple times to make sure I understood how it worked. I rehearsed the questions and prompts Richard had given me. I went over every detail of the plan until I could execute it in my sleep. And then, as night fell over my house, I sat in Vincent's old chair in the living room and let myself grieve. I grieved for the son I'd thought I had, for the relationship I believed we shared, for the future I'd imagined where my child would care for me in my old age rather than plot to rob and possibly murder me. The tears came hard and bitter, and I didn't try to stop them. Tomorrow I would need to be strong, composed, convincing in my role as the cooperative mother willingly handing over her financial security. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of this betrayal. At some point, I must have fallen asleep in that chair, because I woke to early morning light streaming through the windows and my phone buzzing with a text message. Garrett, looking forward to seeing you today, Mom. We'll be there at 2 p.m. sharp. Make sure you have the safe combination ready. This is going to be a fresh start for all of us. A fresh start. The irony was almost laughable. For him and Cassandra, it would be a fresh start funded by my life's savings. For me, it was supposed to be an ending. I texted back, I'll have everything ready. See you at 2. Then I got up, showered, dressed in comfortable clothes, and prepared my house for what I now thought of as the final confrontation. The recording pen went in my cardigan pocket with the clip visible. I set out coffee and cookies on the dining room table, the picture of a welcoming hostess. I even took the time to put on makeup and style my hair, wanting to look as competent and put together as possible for the recording. At 1:30 p.m., Richard Chen called. I'm parked 3 houses down in an unmarked car. Preston is with me. The moment you feel unsafe or need us to intervene, you call my number and let it ring twice, then hang up. We'll be inside in under 30 seconds. Understand? I understand. And Mrs. Hastings? You're doing the right thing. You're not just protecting yourself. You're stopping people who would hurt others after you. That takes courage. At 1:58 p.m., Garrett's car pulled into my driveway. I watched through the window as he and Cassandra got out, both dressed casually but expensively, both wearing expressions of barely concealed anticipation. They thought they were walking into a victory, a coronation of their scheme. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. I opened the door before they could ring the bell, smiling warmly. Right on time. Come in, come in. I have coffee ready. Thanks, Mom, Garrett said, kissing my cheek in a gesture that once would have felt natural but now felt like a violation. Cassandra followed him inside, her eyes immediately scanning the room like a predator assessing territory. We settled around the dining room table, and I poured coffee with steady hands while the recording pen in my pocket captured everything. So, I said brightly, I've been thinking about what you said, and you're absolutely right. I have been making things too complicated. It's time for me to let go and let you handle everything. So, I said brightly, I've been thinking about what you said, and you're absolutely right. I have been making things too complicated. It's time for me to let go and let you handle everything. Garrett and Cassandra exchanged a quick glance of surprise and satisfaction. That's wonderful to hear, Mom, Garrett said. We're so glad you've come around to seeing this our way. Our way, I repeated, as if testing the phrase. That's an interesting way to put it. Tell me, when did this become our way instead of what's best for me? A flicker of something crossed Garrett's face, annoyance or concern, I couldn't tell which. It's the same thing, Mom. What's best for you is what we're planning. And what exactly are you planning? I asked innocently. Help me understand the full picture. Once you have my safe combination and access to everything, what happens next? Cassandra leaned forward, her voice smooth as honey. Well, first we'll secure your valuables in a more modern, comprehensive insurance policy. Then we'll work on consolidating your accounts into something more manageable. We've already identified some excellent investment opportunities that could really maximize your returns. Investment opportunities, I echoed. Like what? There's a development project in Montana that's looking for investors, Garrett said. High risk but potentially huge returns. We think it would be perfect for diversifying your portfolio. Montana. Far away, hard to track, and knowing what I knew about Cassandra's history, probably completely fraudulent or non-existent. And my house? My cabin in Northwood? What's the plan for those? We think you should sell them both, Cassandra said. The market is excellent right now, and the money could be better used elsewhere. Plus, as we discussed, maintaining properties at your age is just too much work. Where would I live? We've been looking at Serenity Hills Retirement Community, Garrett said. Beautiful place, full service, everything taken care of for you. You'd have a nice apartment, meals provided, activities, healthcare on site. Much better than rattling around in this big house alone. Serenity Hills. I'd looked it up last night after Richard left. It was a locked memory care facility, the kind of place where residents didn't come and go freely. If they got me in there, I'd be completely isolated and under their control. That sounds expensive, I said. It is, Garrett admitted. About $8,000 a month. But with the money from selling your properties and the income from your investments, it's easily manageable. Easily manageable because they'd be managing it, skimming off whatever they wanted while I was locked away in a facility, probably drugged to keep me compliant. And what about those stock certificates in my safe? I asked, watching their faces carefully. The Nextbridge Pharmaceutical shares Vincent left me? The change in atmosphere was immediate. Both Garrett and Cassandra went very still, like predators who just spotted their prey. You remember those? Cassandra asked carefully. Of course I remember. They're valuable, aren't they? We're not sure, Garrett said, but his voice was tight with badly concealed excitement. We'd have to get them appraised. But yes, they might be worth something, especially if the company is still operating. He was lying. He knew exactly what they were worth. The question was how he'd found out. Did you have them appraised already? I asked directly. A long pause. Then Cassandra laughed lightly. Eleanor, why would we do that without your knowledge? I don't know, Cassandra. Or should I call you Jennifer? Jennifer Dawson from Tampa? The room went dead silent. All the color drained from Cassandra's face. Garrett's expression shifted from confusion to dawning alarm. What are you talking about? Cassandra asked, her voice losing its honey-smooth quality. I'm talking about your real identity. Your history of targeting wealthy men. Your pattern of obtaining power of attorney and then mysteriously, your benefactors die in tragic accidents shortly after. I pulled out my phone, where I'd loaded some of Preston's evidence. I'm talking about Harold Winters, who fell down the stairs 3 months after you gained control of his finances. About Martin Roche, who had a convenient heart attack just weeks after signing over his estate to you. Garrett stood up abruptly. Mom, what the hell is this? Where are you getting this information? From Preston Thornfield. Your girlfriend's ex-husband. The one she's still legally married to, by the way. Did you know their divorce was based on fraudulent claims she made? Preston is a liar, Cassandra hissed, her mask completely dropping. He's a bitter, vindictive man who can't accept that I left him. Is he? Because he has court documents. Private investigator reports. Death certificates. Insurance policies you took out on your victims with yourself as beneficiary. I looked at my son. Garrett, did you know she's done this before? Did you know you're helping a serial con artist who may have murdered at least 2 people? Garrett's face was pale, but his expression was hard to read. You're paranoid, Mom. This is exactly the kind of confused, delusional behavior we were worried about. Am I confused? Let me make sure I understand your plan correctly. I stood up, channeling every ounce of strength I had left. You pressure me into signing over power of attorney. You gain access to my safe and discover stock certificates worth $3.7 million. You cash out those stocks, sell my properties, and move me into a locked facility where I'm isolated and medicated. And then, what? I have an unfortunate accident. Maybe I fall in the shower. Maybe I have a stroke. Something that allows you to inherit everything without waiting for nature to take its course. You're insane, Cassandra said, but her eyes were calculating, assessing whether this confrontation could still be salvaged. The truly insane thing, I continued, is that you thought I wouldn't figure it out. That I'd just hand over everything and disappear quietly into whatever ending you'd planned for me. Garrett's hands were clenched into fists. Mom, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. We're trying to help you, and you're making wild accusations based on lies from a man who has every reason to slander Cassie. Then explain the life insurance policy. Both of them froze. What life insurance policy? Garrett asked, but his voice had gone flat. The $500,000 policy taken out on me 3 weeks ago. The one listing you as beneficiary, Garrett. Filed the same day I signed the power of attorney. I'd been bluffing, going on Richard's suspicion, but the looks on their faces told me I'd struck gold. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't question why my son suddenly needed $500,000 in life insurance on his elderly mother? Cassandra stood up slowly. We need to go, Garrett. Now. But Garrett was staring at me with something between fury and fear. You can't prove any of this. You're just making things up because you can't handle the fact that you're getting old and need help. Can't I? I pulled the recording pen from my pocket and held it up. This has been recording everything since you arrived. Every lie you've told. Every part of your plan you've revealed. Every admission you've made. Cassandra's face transformed into something ugly and hateful. You bitch. You vindictive old bitch. I'm not vindictive, I said quietly. I'm a mother protecting herself from her own son. And I'm a woman making sure you never do this to anyone else. Garrett moved toward me, and for a terrible moment I thought he might actually become violent. But then my phone rang, Richard's number, right on schedule. That's my attorney, I said, answering and putting it on speaker. Richard, perfect timing. Mrs. Hastings, I have the Millbrook police on the line with me. They've been listening to the recording feed. Detective Morrison would like to speak with your guests. A deep male voice came through the phone. "This is Detective Sarah Morrison. Mr. Garrett Hastings and Ms. Jennifer Dawson, also known as Cassandra Whitley, you need to remain where you are. Officers are approaching the house now to take your statements regarding conspiracy to commit fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Through my front window, I could see 2 police cars pulling up, their lights flashing. Cassandra bolted for the back door, but Garrett grabbed her arm. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't make it worse." For a moment, they stood frozen, and I saw something crack in my son's face. All the bravado, all the calculated coldness, it crumbled, and what was left looked like a scared, ashamed man who just realized the magnitude of what he'd done. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I didn't," she said. "It would be simple. She said you'd never even know." "I didn't think, you didn't think you'd get caught," I finished for him. "That's not the same as being sorry, Garrett." The police entered through the front door, and the next hour passed in a blur of statements, Miranda rights, and Cassandra's shrill protests that this was all a misunderstanding, that she was being persecuted, that Preston had orchestrated everything to frame her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recording. Preston's documentation. The insurance policy. And finally, when confronted with everything, Garrett broke down and confessed his part in the scheme, confirming that Cassandra had approached him 2 years ago, had researched his family, had learned about my assets, and had cultivated their relationship specifically to gain access to my wealth. As they led him away in handcuffs, Garrett looked back at me one last time. "Mom, I couldn't listen." I turned away, and the police took my son and his accomplice out of my house and out of my life. 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden behind the house I'd almost lost, drinking morning coffee and reading the newspaper. The Nexbridge pharmaceutical stock certificates had been secured in a proper trust, managed by Richard Chen and completely protected from anyone who might try to access them improperly. My properties remained mine. My assets were secure. Cassandra, Jennifer Dawson, was awaiting trial on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and in a development that didn't surprise me, suspicion of murder in the deaths of Harold Winters and Martin Roche. Authorities in 3 states had reopened investigations into her activities, and more victims had come forward. Garrett had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Cassandra. He'd receive 5 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy, with the possibility of parole in 3. The prosecution had been sympathetic to the argument that he'd been manipulated by a sophisticated con artist, especially once Richard Chen provided evidence of Cassandra's pattern of targeting and corrupting accomplices. I'd visited Garrett once in jail. We'd sat across from each other in a sterile visitation room, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, he'd spoken. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I want you to know that somewhere in the middle of all of it, I lost sight of who you were. You stopped being my mother and started being just an obstacle. And I hate myself for that." I'd looked at my son, my child, my greatest achievement and my deepest failure, and felt a complicated mix of emotions I still couldn't fully untangle. Love and betrayal. Grief and relief. Hope and acceptance. "I don't know if I can forgive you either," I'd told him honestly. "But I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad you'll have a chance to become someone better than who you were. And I hope someday we can find some kind of relationship that isn't based on my money or your need for it." That was all I could offer. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't complete rejection either. It was something in between, the complicated reality of loving someone who tried to destroy you. As I sat in my garden that morning, my phone rang. Preston Thornfield. "Eleanor, good morning. I wanted to let you know that the DA officially charged Cassandra with Martin Roche's murder this morning. The investigation found evidence of antifreeze poisoning disguised as heart medication. They're confident they can get a conviction." "That's good," I said, feeling the weight of it. A man was dead because I hadn't looked at that flash drive when Preston first gave it to me. If I'd acted sooner, investigated earlier, maybe I could have prevented the Portland widower's death. "Don't do that," Preston said, reading my silence correctly. "Don't blame yourself for what she did. Cassandra is responsible for her crimes, not the people she fooled. I know. But knowing and feeling are different things. They are, he agreed. Listen, I'm having a small dinner party next week. Just a few friends. Nothing fancy. I'd like you to come, if you're comfortable with that. I smiled. Over the past 6 months, Preston and I had formed an unlikely friendship, two people bonded by having been targeted by the same predator. I'd like that. Thank you. After hanging up, I returned to my newspaper, but my mind wandered to the future. I was 70 years old. My son was in prison. My trust in family had been shattered. But I was alive, independent, and secure. My assets were protected. My mind was sharp. And I discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I thought about Harriet from that video I'd watched so long ago, the woman who'd been humiliated at dinner and had found the courage to expose her daughter's betrayal. I'd found myself in a similar situation, and like her, I'd chosen to fight rather than be a victim. The garden around me was full of late spring flowers, evidence of cycles of death and renewal. My relationship with Garrett had died, but perhaps something new could eventually grow from those ruins. Not what we'd had before, that was gone forever, but maybe something honest, built on truth rather than obligation or greed. A neighbor walking her dog waved at me from the sidewalk, and I waved back. Life in Millbrook continued. My friends at the community center knew only that I'd had some family difficulties that were now resolved. They didn't need to know the details of how my son had tried to rob and possibly murder me. That was private, mine to carry and process in my own time. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard Chin. Trust documents are finalized. Your estate is secure. When you're ready, we should discuss setting up a foundation in Vincent's name using a portion of those stock proceeds. You mentioned wanting to help seniors facing financial exploitation. Yes. That felt right. Taking this horrible experience and using it to protect others. Creating something positive from something that had almost destroyed me. I texted back, let's meet next week to discuss it. Thank you for everything, Richard. As the morning sun warmed my face, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months, peace. Not happiness exactly, the wounds were too fresh for that. But peace. The peace of knowing I'd fought for myself, protected what was mine, and survived an experience that could have ended my life. I was 70 years old. I was a widow. My son was in prison. But I was free. Truly, completely free in a way I'd never been before, because I now knew exactly what I was capable of when my survival was at stake. And that knowledge, hard-won and painful as it was, felt like a gift. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar with family members who wanted control of your assets? Comment below and share your city so I know how far my story has reached. Remember, trust is precious, but verification is essential. Power of attorney is a powerful legal tool, but it should only be granted to people whose integrity is beyond question. And if someone pressures you to sign away control of your finances, especially if they use fear, guilt, or threats, that's not love. That's manipulation. Protect yourself. Protect your assets. And never be afraid to say no to people who claim to be helping you but whose actions suggest something very different. Thank you for following my story to the end. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and always remember, you deserve to maintain control of your own life, no matter what anyone else says. I'm leaving 2 other stories on the final screen that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the end.